in the stillness of the night, when the world is hushed and the echoes of the day's endeavors begin to fade, there lies a question that, whether we acknowledge it or not, hovers on the edge of every mind and soul. What drives us to be more than we are? Is it the gentle hand of encouragement, or is it the harsh whip of criticism that propels us forward, urging us to transcend our current state and reach for something greater? This question is not new. It is as old as time itself. Throughout history, from the ancient philosophers to the wise men of old, the debate has raged. Is it better to be led by love or by fear, by support or by stern rebuke? Within this debate lies another, more insidious question. Where do we draw the line between what is necessary and what is harmful? Between motivation and abuse? Between tough love and toxicity? The human spirit, in all its resilience and fragility, is a curious thing. We are, each of us, a complex tapestry of emotions, experiences, hopes, and fears. We are driven by an insatiable desire to achieve, to grow, to be better tomorrow than we are today. But how do we harness this desire? How do we channel it in a way that lifts us up rather than drags us down? Consider, for a moment, the tale of a young sapling, fragile and new to the world. It stands in a meadow, surrounded by the vastness of nature, vulnerable to the elements. Now imagine that this sapling is given everything it needs to grow: water, sunlight, rich soil. But alongside these essentials, it also faces the occasional storm, the gusts of wind that threaten to uproot it, the weight of heavy rains that bend its slender. At first glance, one might think that these storms are nothing but a curse, an unnecessary trial that the sapling must endure. But look closer. It is in facing these challenges that the sapling's roots dig deeper, that its trunk grows stronger, that it learns to stand tall in the face of adversity. The storms, though harsh, are not its enemy. They are, in fact, the very forces that shape it into the mighty oak it is destined to become. And so it is with us. We too must face our storm. We too must endure the winds of criticism, the rains of failure, the harsh words that, though they sting, push us to dig deeper, to grow stronger, to rise above our circumstances. But herein lies the danger, for not all storms are created equal. Some bring life, while others bring destruction. And the same can be said of the words we use to motivate, to encourage, to push others or ourselves toward great. It is a fine line we walk, this path between tough love and toxicity. And it is a line that we must tread with the utmost care, for the consequences of misstep can be. Imagine, if you will, a teacher standing before a classroom of eager young minds. This teacher, let us say, is driven by a deep and abiding passion for their students' success. They see potential in every face before them, and they are determined to bring out the best in each and every one. But how does this teacher achieve that goal? Do they do so with gentle encouragement, with words of affirmation and support, or do they take a different approach, one that is harsher, more demanding, more unforgiving? The answer, as with most things in life, is not so simple. There is a time and a place for both approaches. There are moments when a gentle nudge is all that is needed to spur someone onto greatness. But there are also times when a firm hand is necessary, when a push, perhaps even a shove, is required to break through the barriers that hold us back. Yet we must be vigilant, for the line between firmness and cruelty is thin indeed. What begins as tough love can all too easily slip into something darker, something more harmful. And when it does, the consequences can be devastating. Consider, for example, the athlete who is pushed beyond their limits, not by their own will, but by the relentless demands of a coach who refuses to accept anything less than perfection. What begins as motivation can quickly become abuse, as the coach's words and actions cross the line from encouragement to harm. The athlete, once driven by a desire to succeed, now finds themselves trapped in a cycle of fear and self-doubt, their spirit crushed under the weight of impossible expectations. Or consider the parent who, in their desire to see their child succeed, becomes overly critical, focusing only on the child's flaws and failures, rather than their strengths and achievements. What was meant to be tough love becomes toxic, as the child grows up feeling that nothing they do is ever good enough, that they are never enough. And what of the self? How often do we, in our quest for self-improvement, become our own harshest critics? How often do we push ourselves to the brink, driven by an inner voice that tells us we must do more, be more, achieve more? We tell ourselves that this is the price of success, that we must be hard on ourselves if we are to reach our goals. But in doing so, do we not risk becoming our own worst enemy? The truth is, there is no one-size-fits-all answer to the question of how best to motivate ourselves and others. What works for one person may not work for another. What is helpful in one situation may be harmful in another. The key, I believe, lies in balance, in knowing when to push and when to pull back, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to encourage and when to correct. But how do we find that balance? How do we know when we have crossed the line from tough love to toxicity? The answer, I believe, lies in empathy, in understanding that every person we encounter is fighting a battle we cannot see, that every soul we meet is carrying a burden we cannot know, and that ultimately the goal of any form of motivation should be to lift up, not to tear down, to build, not to destroy. When we approach others with empathy, we begin to see the world through their eyes. We begin to understand their struggles, their fears, their hopes, and their dreams. And in that understanding, we find the wisdom to know how best to help them on their journey. Empathy allows us to recognize when our words are having the desired effect, when they are inspiring someone to reach for greatness, to overcome their obstacles, to be the best they can be. But it also allows us to recognize when our words are causing harm, when they are tearing someone down, crushing their spirit, or driving them to the brink. Empathy, in short, is the key to walking the fine line between tough love and toxicity. It is the key to understanding when we are motivating and when we are abusing, when we are helping and when we are hurting. But empathy is not enough on its own. It must be coupled with wisdom, the wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to push and when to pull back. And it must be coupled with humility, the humility to recognize that we are not always right, that our way is not always the best way, that our intentions, no matter how good, can sometimes lead to unintended harm. We must also recognize that there is a power in our words, a power that can be both creative and destructive. Words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. They have the power to inspire, to uplift, to motivate. But they also have the power to wound, to tear down, to destroy. And so, as we seek to motivate others, as we seek to push them toward greatness, we must do so with care. We must weigh our words carefully, considering not just their immediate effect, but their long-term consequences. Are we building up, or are we tearing down? Are we encouraging, or are we discouraging? Are we helping, or are we hurting? It is not an easy task. It requires constant vigilance, constant self-reflection, constant empathy and wisdom. But it is a task that we must undertake if we are to truly help others and ourselves reach our full potential. We must also be willing to listen, to truly listen to those we seek to motivate. We must be willing to hear their concerns, their fears, their doubts. We must be willing to understand their perspective, their experiences, their unique, and we must be willing to adjust our approach accordingly. For motivation is not a one-size-fits-all endeavor. What motivates one person may not motivate another. What inspires one person may discourage another. And so, we must be flexible, adaptable, and willing to change our approach as needed. But above all, we must approach the task of motivation with love. Not the harsh, demanding love that seeks only results, but the kind, patient, compassionate love that seeks the best for others, that sees their potential, that believes in their ability to achieve great things, and that supports them every step of the way. It is this kind of love, the love that lifts up rather than tears down, that builds rather than destroys, that motivates rather than abuses, that will ultimately lead to true success, both for ourselves and for those we seek to help. In the end, the question is not whether we should use tough love or gentleness, firmness or kindness. The question is how we can best balance these approaches, how we can walk the fine line between motivation and abuse, how we can ensure that our words and actions are helping, not hurting. It is a challenge, to be sure, but it is a challenge worth undertaking. For doing so, we not only help others to reach their full potential, but we also grow ourselves. We become more empathetic, more wise, more humble. We become better leaders, better mentors, better friends. To delve further into this intricate dance between motivation and the potential for harm, let us explore the broader implications of our actions, especially those that arise from a place of authority, influence, or guidance. Whether you are a mentor, a parent, a teacher, a coach, or even a friend, the responsibility to guide others toward their best selves carries with it a profound ethical burden. The nature of authority is such that it often comes with an inherent imbalance of power. This imbalance can create an environment where the intentions of the one in authority, no matter how pure or well-meaning, can be misinterpreted, misconstrued, or even magnified to an extent that they become counterproductive. It is essential to understand that authority does not simply amplify one's voice. It also magnifies the impact of one's words and actions. Take, for instance, the classic story of the potter and the clay. The potter, with experienced hands, shapes the clay into a beautiful vessel, but the clay, if mishandled, can easily become misshapen or cracked. Similarly, those in positions of influence must handle their clay, the people they are guiding, with both firmness and gentleness. Too much pressure, and the spirit can crack. Too little, and the form may not hold. The challenge lies in knowing how much is enough. This requires a deep understanding of the individual, what motivates them, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how they respond to different forms of encouragement or critique. It requires a sensitivity to their emotional and psychological states, an awareness that they are not merely vessels to be filled with knowledge or skill, but complex beings with their own inner world. Consider the power of expectation. Expectations can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, they can inspire individuals to rise to the occasion, to push beyond their perceived limits. On the other hand, they can also become a source of immense pressure, leading to stress, anxiety, and even burnout. It is one thing to set high standards. It is quite another to make those standards so high that they become unattainable, leaving the individual feeling inadequate, no matter how hard they try. This is where the subtle difference between aspiration and imposition comes into play. Aspiration is about encouraging others to reach for their highest potential, to dream big, and to strive for excellence. It is about nurturing their ambitions and supporting their growth. Imposition, on the other hand, is about projecting one's own desires, expectations, and goals onto another person, often without regard for their own aspirations or limitations. Aspiration invites others to grow. Imposition demands it. Aspiration is about empowerment, while imposition is about control. And when control masquerades as motivation, it can easily slip into the realm of toxicity. A common scenario where this distinction becomes blurred is in the world of competitive sports. Athletes are often pushed to their limits, both physically and mentally, in the pursuit of victory. Coaches, driven by desire to see their team succeed, may employ harsh tactics, thinking that toughness and resilience are best forged in the fires of relentless pressure. And indeed, there are many success stories where athletes credit their achievements to the tough love of their coaches. However, for every success story, there are countless untold tales of athletes who have been broken by this same approach. Those who have been pushed too far, whose love for the sport was extinguished by the very person who was supposed to nurture it. The line between motivation and abuse is so thin here that it often takes years, if not decades, for the damage to be fully understood and acknowledged. Another area where this line is perilously thin is in the context of parenting. Parents, out of love and concern for their children's futures, may adopt a strict or demanding approach, believing that they are preparing their children for the harsh realities of the intentions are noble, but the execution can sometimes lead to unintended consequences. Children, like young plants, need both sunlight and rain. They need discipline, yes, but they also need love, encouragement, and understanding. A parent who is too strict, who focuses only on correcting mistakes and enforcing rules, may inadvertently instill a deep-seated fear of failure in their child. This fear can stifle creativity, inhibit risk-taking, and ultimately prevent the child from reaching their full potential. On the other hand, a parent who is too lenient, who avoids any form of criticism or discipline, may leave their child ill-prepared for the challenges of the real world. The balance, once again, is key. It is about finding the right mix of guidance and freedom, of structure and flexibility, of discipline and compassion. In the educational system, this balance is also crucial. Teachers hold the keys to both the intellectual and emotional development of their students. A teacher who inspires curiosity, who encourages questions and fosters a love of learning, can ignite a lifelong passion for knowledge. But a teacher who dismisses questions, who is overly critical, or who imposes their own beliefs without room for discussion, can snuff out that spark before it even has a chance to catch fire. It is often said that the best teachers are those who make learning an adventure, who challenge their students to think for themselves, and who provide the tools and the support needed to navigate the complexities of the world. These teachers understand that true education is not about filling minds with facts, but about shaping character, nurturing critical thinking, and fostering a sense of wonder and curiosity about the world. But what happens when a teacher, in their zeal to push their students to excel, becomes overly demanding or harsh? What happens when the quest for academic excellence becomes a relentless pursuit of perfection, leaving students feeling overwhelmed, stressed, and inadequate? The very act of teaching, which should be a guiding light, can become a source of darkness, leading to anxiety, burnout, and a loss of love for learning. This brings us to an important realization. The line between tough love and toxicity is not just about the actions we take or the words we use. It is also about the underlying motivations behind those actions and words. It is about whether we are truly acting in the best interests of the other person, or whether we are driven by our own desires, fears, or insecurities. Tough love, when it is truly born out of love, is always accompanied by empathy, patience, and understanding. It is about seeing the potential in others and gently guiding them towards it, even when it requires difficult conversations or challenging situations. It is about being firm but fair, demanding but supportive, critical but constructive. Toxicity, on the other hand, often arises from a place of fear of failure, fear of inadequacy, fear of losing control. It is driven by a need to assert power, to impose one's will, to achieve results at any cost. And in the process, it can cause lasting harm to those it is intended to help. So, how do we guard against toxicity in our efforts to motivate others? How do we ensure that our tough love remains just that, love, and not something more sinister? One way is through self-reflection. We must continue to ask ourselves why we are saying what we are saying, why we are doing what we are doing. Are our words and actions truly in the best interest of the other person? Are they helping to build them up, or are they tearing them down? Are we motivated by love and compassion, or by fear and control? Another way is through open communication. We must be willing to listen to those we are trying to motivate, to hear their concerns, their fears, and their needs. We must create a space where they feel safe to express themselves, where they know that their voices will be heard and respected. And we must be willing to adjust our approach based on their feedback, recognizing that what works for one person may not work for another. Finally, we must be willing to admit when we have crossed the line, when our tough love has become toxic. This requires humility. The humility to acknowledge our mistakes, to apologize when necessary, and to make amends. It requires the courage to change course, even when it is difficult, and the wisdom to seek help when we are unsure of the best way forward. In conclusion, the task of motivating others is both a great privilege and a great responsibility. It requires us to walk a fine line, to balance firmness with compassion, discipline with understanding, and aspiration with acceptance. It requires us to constantly check our motivations, to ensure that our words and actions are truly born out of love, and not out of fear or control. And it requires us to recognize that, ultimately, the goal of any form of motivation should be to help others, and ourselves grow into the best versions of ourselves, not through coercion or force, but through encouragement, support, abiding respect for the unique journey of every individual. I leave you with this. As you go about your days, as you seek to motivate others and yourself, remember the power of your words, the impact of your actions, the importance of empathy, wisdom, and humility. Remember that the line between tough love and toxicity is a fine one, and it is one that must be walked with care. But above all, remember that the goal of any form of motivation should be to build up, to encourage, to inspire, to help others, and yourself reach your full potential. For in the end, it is not the storms that define us, but how we respond to them. It is not the challenges we face, but how we overcome them. And it is not the words we hear, but how we choose to let them shape